Moin moin, hello, welcome ladies and gentlemen, Dawn Spectre here today with my review for the KiwiEars Quintet. Yes, today it's finally time. We are taking a look at the $200-ish contender that KiwiEars made that has also been gaining quite a bit of traction or hype, and yeah, today we figure out what this thing can, what it can't, how it sounds, and what you get. And as usual, start with a quick accessories and unboxing. That's the Quintet here, that's its casing. You have the standard thing where you just push it out, like this. Then, yeah, just matte black with the KiwiEars logo. You shake this a bit and then it's easy to open. I like to see that. On the inside, layer of foam here to protect it from scratches. Here would be IEM inside. And once we manage to get that out, which is a bit challenging as you can see, beneath the carrying case, and in the carrying case would be the cable and the set of ear tips. And as ear tips, unfortunately, you only get two different sets, one with a bit of smaller bore and one with a bit of wider bore, which is a bit shorter, but no foam. And yeah, I think generally for like 200-ish bucks, I honestly would like to see a bit more here. Like, give me at least a few more accessories. Give me a pair of foam tips, maybe a third set of silicone tips, or something that is a bit more special silicone tip than not just these random tips here. So it's a bit minimalistic, but still okay. Just barely enough, I would say. And then next, let's remove this bullshit and let's get what we actually want, the actual IEM here. I'll be starting off with IEM Build before we come to cable. And let me just remove the cable here. This is the IEM. As you can see, it has an aluminum faceplate and the bottom beneath is actual resin. And what should I say, this is a pretty standard affair with the Quintet here. There isn't much going on or not much noteworthy to talk about. The faceplate is okay integrated. The seams, unfortunately, around this here are a bit uneven. Like, you can definitely notice and see them with the finger, but it's not bad at all. Like, I have definitely seen IEMs doing this way worse, so I would still describe it at this price as like okay, like not bad at all. And yeah, then you have two pressure holes on the top here, one close to the nozzle and the one a bit more back to the 2-pin. The 2-pin itself is kinda color matched, it's good enough, and it's flush, so you should be able to mount most cables. And yeah, last but not least, on the inside here, you have the nozzle, which is in one-piece design. And you can see the sound tubes are a bit recessed at the back. And you can also see one, most likely, a dampener here for the bass, I would say, that is supposed to cut out the higher frequencies. At least that's my best assumption here. And that seems to be well glued on. And yeah, generally this IEM in terms of build is absolutely fine. Like, I think a tad bit better at this price could be the integration of the faceplate here. But other than that, I see no problem. Like, it also doesn't feel cheap at all. And yeah, IEM Build is absolutely acceptable. No problems whatsoever. And then next, let's come to the cable. And yeah, after I last time reviewed the bridge and the Kailua, which both did have kinda okay cables, yeah, the trend kinda continues with this one here. Like, this is okay. Like, as you can see, it got a bit tangled when I just had it lying around on my table here. It is not the smoothest, most tangle-free experience, but it's fine. When you try to stretch it a bit as this, you can see it just gets straight enough. My biggest complaint probably is this shiny connector. As you can see, it collects fingerprints like crazy, and it's slippery. So again, if you have a new connector or a new DAC, a new amp, it could be a bit difficult to get it in and out. A bit about that, the strain release here, which is at least soft enough, so it should do a bit of strain release, but to be really efficient, it would need to be at least a few millimeters longer. So again, it's barely usable. And when we come to the 4-core wire here, which as you can see is like medium thickness, it's relatively light though, so if you like light cables, that should do the job just fine. It is lightly sticky though, like not as sticky as the Moondrop cable, not even close to that, but lightly sticky. And yeah, the waving itself is done decently or like accurately enough, and it seems to be pretty evenly. And if we then go to the splitter, which comes here, follows the same style, collects fingerprints like crazy, but seems to be overall well made. And then a bit further up, you get the actual 2 cores here that make the cable that goes to your ear. And I measured them this time, the cables, actually, because maybe they look a bit thinner, but no, they're actually the same thickness, so that's neat for general symmetry purposes. And there's a small issue with the cable, at least if you use chin sliders like me. This is really stiff. Like, it's pretty difficult to move it, and it stays absolutely in place, but it's just a bit stiff overall and not really usable in day-to-day life. I wish it would be tiny bit easier to move. It would still stay in place, but just be a bit more easy general. And when we come to ear hooks, these are totally fine. Again, what I should have noticed also in other reviews before, when your ear hooks have like a rubber structure like this, where you still have like grooves and it kind of follows the structure of the cable beneath, it can be a bit uncomfortable for some. I didn't have a problem with this cable whatsoever. It worked totally fine. And also the bending radius here is not too big or too small. It should just work for most ears. And the rubberization itself is not too thick. So you should be absolutely okay with this cable. And then last but not least, we have the tubing connector, where the right side is red color coded. Although I will notice if you put it actually in the IEM, which I will attempt now. It's a bit difficult, but you can see the red is barely visible. If you just slightly off angle, you can't see it. I think a bit more or a bit on ring here would be more useful in order to just see it in day-to-day life. Okay, that's it. Cable is fine. Not great, not bad. A bit subpar, I would say. I've seen cheaper IEMs with better cables, but it's okay. And then next, let's talk about comfort and fit. Again, I will throw in measurements here, and I think I can keep this chapter short. Now, no measurements. Let's just quickly review, I guess it is. The nozzle is relatively long, as you can see here in the picture. It's about 6 mm in length, and it also is relatively wide with 6.2 mm at the lip. So, but this means it is generally a thick nozzle, and if you have smaller ear canals, it can be pretty difficult to mount. Combined both with the longer nozzle, it can be really challenging to find the right tip. And usually I don't use the included tips, but here the included very short, very wide bore tip is actually the only thing that really fit me. Like, really everything else didn't work, including the Moondrop spring, which also didn't work for me. It usually does work, even for the variations it did. But here, only with this tip, and partly with CP360 from SpinFit, because those are also pretty short. These two worked. Although CP360, you can go for really deep insertion, and we have to talk about that in terms of sound later. But yeah, like comfort-wise, if you get it to fit well with this tip, it can be pretty comfortable or is pretty comfortable. But the problem is getting it to fit in the first place. It's just too wide of a nozzle and too long of a nozzle. And that can be definitely a challenge. And yeah, that's why also I would say if you know you have problems with longer nozzles or wider nozzles, this will not be for you. And yeah, you will just not be able to mount it properly. Although isolation on the flip side is actually pretty damn good. Of course, assuming you get a deep insertion like this would allow you for, because the resin here is also thicker, you have a metal faceplate, it does isolate well, probably the best thing that I have heard in terms of isolation in the last few months, and it is sufficient for basically everything, at home, the office, walking outside, busy main roads, shouldn't be a problem with the Quintet. Again, let me mention though, what would be a bit better from KiwiEars if I would put a special pair of foam tips here. That would still improve the isolation a bit, or like a very short pair. They didn't, but if you have cut foam tips, those could work here as well and make it to a really superb isolating IEM. Yeah, that's it. And then drivability, yeah, this, I don't know, like I haven't been able to find official stats for the Quintet in terms of how much impedance it should have. So the things I found in some other reviews said 32 ohms at 106 decibels. They didn't say how many milliwatt or where it was measured, don't know. But that's the data I could find. Sometimes it also says 102 decibels, but the average seems to be 106. So just on the datasheet, it's basically similar to most dynamic driver IEMs, or like most of IEMs. Shouldn't be difficult to drive whatsoever. And yeah, from my experience on most devices, you just fine with the Quintet. The Apple dongle just worked fine. My laptop just worked fine. Of course, with slight hiss in the background, it's normal. Upping the power a bit to the Hibi FC4, shunting up 5 or something similar, I think did improve it a bit. but it's not a lot. And if you still up the power more to something my SU8 plus SP200, which has way more power than you ever need for IEMs, I don't think you get anything additionally. So again, I would say you get like 90% of what the Quintet is capable of with your random ass dongle, so it barely scales at all, if any. And it definitely doesn't scale with high power sources. And then let's come to the star of the show. Yeah, let's talk about sound. And again, I will give you first the general characteristics here, which depending on your definition tend to be between U and V-shaped. My books, it's kinda lightly V-shaped. The bass boost starts below 300 Hz and it has a treble boost. It's Harmonish inspired, I would say. So you could say this is not exactly Harman neutral, but it at least gets reasonably close to Harman without adhering to it that closely, which to my books is a good thing because Harman ain't perfect. And yeah, I think honestly in this review, because it's a small spoiler, it's so good, I will actually compare it to the AJ07M in quite a few cases, just because the graph of the AJ07M is also Harmonish inspired, but does a bit of its own thing, and this one does also a bit of its own thing, which is working or not, depending on how you like it. But again, first let's start with extension. And yes, let me throw on the graph for you now. As you can see, the Quintet extends past 10K. According to measurements, 13K without the pinar or without deep insertion. And this is also what kind of my ear tells me. Like 12, 13K is what you get, and after that there isn't much information. Compared to the AJ07M, the graph here shows it a bit worse than it actually is in real life to my ear. That has a bit more extension, but not that much more. So this means for the Quintet is it does usually come off as detailed and getting most of the trailing end of tones or the leading edges right without being too artificially pronounced past 10K. It could be better, yes, but for this pricing I don't really have a problem here. But and now we come to the problem that the Quintet, in my opinion, has besides comfort. It is very, very dependent on insertion depth. That means if you go for a shallow insertion with the fake pinar that I have to measure this, for instance, where I can't really insert this as deep as it would be possible in real human ear, it basically kills mid-treble to upper treble. And then if you go for a deep insertion, deep, like really deep, what you can do with the, again, let me show where I am here, with this tip you can go for really deep insertions, or with the CP360 can go really deep, and then you kill the upper treble again. And I noticed, because I used this tip first, pushed it all the way in to get the, we talk about this later on in the verdict, theoretically it should have a bone conduction driver. More about it later. So I wanted to give it the best chance to like get bone conduction working, and pushed it all the way in, and suddenly upper treble was way reduced. And I was like, huh, that's strange. Like, what just happened? And I just pulled it out like 2 millimeters or so, and suddenly we had upper treble again, and it sounded just way better. And I was like, I don't know, like, could reproduce this with CP360 again, and my rig also can reproduce this exact behavior. Just push it in too much, you kill upper treble. Pull it out too much, you also kill upper treble and mid-treble a bit. So it's really finicky in terms of insertion, and that's why I think you have to be careful when wearing this. Also, when people review this, it can really vary widely depending on how deep your ear canal is, how big your ear is. This is very finicky in terms of that. And my ear is like medium-sized, small ear canal. So my subjective review here, of course, is only based on my ear, where I get a deep but not too deep insertion. I basically try to recreate what the normal measurements without fake pinar do, and I think I come close enough with how I have it inserted in my ear. And that means, yes, you do get a peak at about like 9 to 10K. There's a peak with the Quintet that gives it a bit of additional spice, a bit of additional pizzazz in your mix. I don't mind that at all, but I think pure Harman neutral would be less energy. And you also get a peak at between like 7K, I would say. The measurements can show it also close to 8K. Definitely more 7K for me, which gives it some spice. And honestly, with some tracks, I noticed that it is actually spicy. Not as much as I would like. Like, I think I would reduce it with equalizer by like 2 decibels or so, at least a 7K peak. because sometimes it can be a bit harsh. Not sibilant because it's not 8K, but a bit harsh. And I would prefer a bit less here. Although this means in other turn, or in turn of event here, E-guitars and cymbals are nicely defined. They have a good splash and good sizzle. They have a nicely leading edge. And I noted Metallica's S&M2 really nice with the quintet, like really working fabulous, and if you want to say that, really enjoyable. And then it kind of follows harmonish, I want to say. You do get though a light peak at like 5K, or like a very light peak. Bit similar to what the AGS7M is doing, just a bit less pronounced than the AGS7M here, but it's way below the 3K peak, so really it should not be a problem at all. And then you get the majority of energy at 3K, giving it a nice tonality overall, and also a natural tonality to my ear. And I know some people prefer less pinam than what Harman calls for. I do not. I think this is the exact right amount for me. And therefore, it also worked absolutely nice for everything I could throw it in the lower treble department. Really, no problem whatsoever. Like really, just very nice tonality. And then the trend of very nice continues to the mids, because dang it, upper mids really nice because it's harmonish. And then we come to the mid-mids, and man, these are probably the best mids I have heard in an IEM this year. Really, I have not accepted it to be this good. Okay, maybe the Hype 2 can rival it, but I have only tried the Hype 2 on CanJam and not had the time to go to a full review of it. But really, these are really nice mids. And if you like your mids to be kind of not neutral, because the bass boost starts at like 200 Hz, so you get a bit of energy there in the upper bass region. But it's really nice. The mids overall work really nice. They come off clear, they come off very well separated, and I didn't have any problems with it whatsoever, just very well defined. Lower mids, also what should I say, like, they're exactly up my alley. Like, they are ever so lightly pronounced because the bass shelf starts at like 300 Hz and you get a tiny bit before that, but they're not as cold as would be at pure Harman. And generally I didn't have any problems with it. Bass guitars came off as nicely defined without having too much. Again, I just want to say, if you like your lower mids to be a bit warmer, this is probably not for you. But on the other hand, what this does is it gives you just more clarity in the mids, and I'm absolutely for clarity. So for me it works nice. If you personally don't like clear mids or the clear lower mids, it's probably not for you. And then, bass. Judging from the bass shelf here, it has about 10 decibels, most of it below 200, but also starting at like 300 Hz. And that usually makes that this is a nice and full set in the bass region. Again, if you do really want upper bass and a bit more mid bass, it could be a bit lean, I think. But for my personal flavor, exactly right up my alley, and the bass is very well defined. However, I do think sometimes it comes off as a bit inconsistent. That means while it's mostly hit and it just hits well, sometimes it just have the feeling like it does lack the punch and weight a bit that I would expect of an IEM with this much of a bass shelf. I noted actually in some of my songs it came off a bit puffy, which I'm not sure why, because the graph doesn't indicate that. Not sure if this is partly to the crossover with the PAs, but that's my best guess, because generally sometimes it comes off as puffy in the bass department, where the AGS7M that has an even more focused bass shelf does never come off as puffy in the bass department. But it's only occasionally, and mostly it's more hit than miss. And in sub bass you definitely do get a rumble, and you do get a nice tonality. And generally it does sound well in the bass department. There's a small caveat though, besides the unevenness or the like puffiness that it can have occasionally. I don't think it is the best textured in the sub-bass department. There's no roll-off according to bass whatsoever. It like really goes straight to 20 Hz, always rising. But it just barely reaches 2 minutes 15 in the Stellar's Mountains. You basically only get texture until like 2 minutes 14. And while that's not being bad by any comparison to other IEMs, it's also not good at all. It's just totally average in terms of how good the sub bass is. But overall, let me stress again that the bass tonality here is mostly really nice, and it just sounds absolutely nicely defined. And yeah, I think even worse when the sub bass texture is most likely, but occasionally it can just come off as a bit puffy. Again, let me stress occasionally, so most of the time it's fine, but just occasionally not so much. And then we come to soundstage, layering, and imaging. And starting strong, I would say. The Quintet does have a nice stage. It's well defined. It has 3-dimensional, it has height, it has width, it has depth. Comes off as very nicely. And the layers, you usually get 5 layers without much caveat. It's absolutely fine, even like with 5 layers in not so well mixed stuff. And in well mixed stuff, I would argue you can even get 7 layers, which is pretty damn impressive. And yeah, imaging also like absolutely well done. You can game with this thing without any issue. Like you get up, down, front, left. Like it just works fine everywhere. And I didn't really have any problems in music or games whatsoever. And then separation, dynamics, and coherence. And yeah, continuing strong, the separation of the Quintet actually is pretty dang good. It is able to isolate or separate even busy instrument lines without much of a problem. It can even isolate different notes pretty well, or vocals, just absolutely no issue whatsoever. Dynamics for a bit of a weak point, I would say. Like, while not being bad, I still feel it lacks the pizzazz that some of the single dynamic IEMs or multiple dynamic IEMs had. I really liked the Kailua for its dynamics. This one here, not so much. It definitely lacks the pizzazz there. And it definitely pushes details in your ear. So it's very detail forward there. And that means also it's louder than it should be. If you have some notes that should be more quiet and mixed, it will come off as just too much a bit, like too loud pronounced, or like just getting pushed in your ear very forward. So in that, the macrodynamics are a bit lacking. And microdynamics are definitely better. Like you can differentiate different loudnesses of similar notes. It's not perfect, of course, but it's for this price absolutely acceptable. And microdynamics would be absolutely fine there. And yeah, coherence and timbre. Generally, I think the Quintet comes off as relatively coherent with a decent timbre overall. I think you can probably tell the micro planars in here apart in terms of coherence. The timbre is probably a bit off. But again, this could also be just because this is a bit brighter than what Harman calls for. And generally, like if you are doing Harman right and you don't go absolutely close to it, 8007M just sounds more natural there to my ear. So yeah, overall timbre and coherence is absolutely good, and there are no real problems here whatsoever. And then last but not least, unfortunately, you have to tackle a small maybe issue, I would say, because according to a spec sheet, the Quintet does come with a bone conduction driver. And let me be absolutely straight here with you, where I said with the bridge doesn't do shit, like under no circumstances it does do anything. Here, I'm not so sure, because I did the experiment with the bridge where I put a piece of foam behind the bridge and then tried to listen with it. Sounded exactly the same as it did without the foam. Here though, if I push a bit of foam behind, it does sound a bit different. And then my question here is that I unfortunately can't answer because I don't have a rig that could actually measure if there's bone conduction going on. It could be just because the Quintet is very sensitive to insertion depth, so maybe the tiny bit that it pushes outward and the angle is changed, that could change the sound, or bone conduction is actually doing something. I cannot be certain, but just judging from the soundstage and how everything is happening, I would say it's more likely it doesn't do anything than that it does something. But I can't be certain, so I will not fault the Quintet for this driver here, unlike what I did with the bridge. I will just say, be wary, maybe it doesn't do anything, maybe it does something, but even without this, it still sounds very good, and so the rest of the verdict stays absolutely intact. That brings me to the verdict. Yeah, what should I say? The Quintet is really, really good. Dare I say it's brilliant at times, and it's really among the best things that I have heard this year, and it doesn't really have like any major weakness. Most of IEMs, I said, okay, we have like this or that major weakness in terms of sound, or sometimes we really have like a big problem in other aspects. But here, like with this tip that comes with it, I think it should fit for most people in terms of comfort, and it sounds well, isolates well, So yes, I will recommend the Quintet. The only group I would not recommend the Quintet if you don't like a bit brighter harmonish, because that's what it's going for here. So it will be more than that, and it cannot be to your liking. And the second group, as I said, because this is a relatively long and wide nozzle, yeah, if you have a really small ear canal, it will be a bit difficult. So yeah, keep that in mind. And yeah, that's it. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have questions, if you have criticisms, if you have recommendations, please leave a comment. And with this, Spector